1 second. Sorry.
Well, we're going to. I think we can. We know she's going to start talking about how important carbon and water is. That's the first sentence.
But thanks to modern communication technology, I can at least deliver a few remarks. So thank you for the opportunity. I want to make 3 points, and then I want to conclude by to Professor Harold Goodwin, fellow panelists, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for having me by video, and my sincere apologies that I can't be there at the World Travel Market in person. I would love to, but thanks to modern communication technology, I can at least deliver a few remarks. So thank you for the opportunity. I want to make 3 points, and then I want to conclude by, where to from here. Now, the first point is that the climate is changing much more rapidly than it was predicted. You will hear the news about hottest year on record, which was 2016, 1.1 degree warmer than the long-term average. And 2016, of course, just beat 2015, which was the hottest year. And 2017 is now on track on being the hottest or the second hottest year. Major changes in the Arctic sea ice, sea level rise is accelerating. A major storm, the intensity of storms, that's cyclones, but also, for example, thunderstorms and hailstorms, etc. The list is long, and we can witness it. We're not talking about climate change in 100 years. We're talking about literally living in a changing world with more and more extreme events. And of course, those impact on tourism. They affect the safety and lives. They affect tourism assets and infrastructure, in particular in the coastal areas. They affect the resource availability. Think about drought and water scarcity, and they affect the business risk, investment, insurance, etc. So we are in a changing world, and I think tourism needs to adapt much more proactively than we initially thought. The second point is around the carbon footprint of tourism, which continues to grow. Now, globally, carbon emissions are stabilizing somewhat. Of course, we're still emitting every year at a very high level, and concentrations in the atmosphere are increasing as a result every year. And we're now pretty much over 400 parts per million carbon dioxide in the atmosphere every year, and that is obviously a very high level. At the current rate, we've got about 17 years until we reach those concentrations that will lead to a 2-degree warming or more. So we do need to decrease. But the problem is, and I think in tourism we can see that very well, that while there is awareness and more initiatives, it's what I call the fallacy of incremental change. So what I mean by that is that we see more and more initiatives, corporate social responsibility, low carbon, people share them, and that's all great. But we're not talking about the things we're not doing, and we're not talking about the growth of tourism. We're growing 5%, or here in my part of the world, over 10% growth in tourism. That, of course, increases the footprint dramatically more than those incremental changes. And I would like to use an analogy from health and diet. So if I have a terrible diet, and I decide, okay, that's bad, I start to cut out soft drinks. And I tell people I now don't have soft drinks anymore, and I'm doing really well. But I still have all the other stuff. And in fact, I have more of it. So potentially things are getting worse. But I'm only focusing on the one good thing that I'm doing. That is a fallacy. And it might be quite deceptive, and it is a risk if I use that as a legitimate reason then to continue, or as a license, a social license to grow by saying, oh, I'm doing these good things. So what I'm saying is we're seeing a lot of good things, a lot of good initiatives, but it can only be the start. It's probably not enough, and there's very few companies, and in fact, Christopher, you're one of them, who keep saying, it's not enough. I've reduced my emissions by 30%. What else can I do? I need to go down to zero in some ways, net zero, in line with the Paris Agreement. So that's the problem of the incremental change and the focus on efficiency rather than absolute reductions. And so that leads me to my third point, which is around the international pressure and the agreements, the Paris Agreement, the Sustainable Development Goals that really demanded more and more from businesses and countries to report emissions, to measure them, to monitor them, to certify them, third-party verified, and to basically be transparent and ambitious. And I think tourism needs to be more involved in that. There's a lot of good action happening, but it is still quite insular and not comprehensive. So, for example, I looked at 200 reports filed for the Global Reporting Initiative. From those, who are already leading examples in the industry, only a third even choose to report carbon emissions. So reporting is key, otherwise we will not manage to control and drive down carbon emissions to meet this tight carbon budget. Now, where does this leave us? So just to summarize the 3 points, the first one is climate is changing more rapidly than we thought. We're already in a world of changes. The second one is the carbon footprint. And the third one is the policies, the agreements, the expectations on carbon reporting. All of those to meet rapid, accelerated action, transformation. All these, in some ways, buzzwords, but it is true. We're running out of time. We don't have much time left to make some substantial changes. There's a little bit of reason for optimism. I did mention about stabilizing CO2 emissions. We have rapid investment and extension in renewable energy sources, also electrification of transport, although sometimes it's tricky when you change one part of the system, so you have more electric vehicles, but you haven't adjusted the other part fast enough, which is developing actually the zero carbon electricity or the infrastructure that goes with it. So there's a little bit room for improvement, and tourism can definitely be more part of that. Key things for tourism are planners and destination managers consider the impacts more proactively. For example, coastal investment, which there's lots going on. Consider sea level rise, consider the impacts of storms, prepare for water scarcity, have these systems in place. That then leads to the question, in some places, is tourism actually a good choice? Remote island destinations who really like to invest in tourism, want to attract cruise ships, everything, major international airports. Sure, it's a tool for development, but tourism comes at a cost. It competes with the local population for resources, water, for example. It leaves a trail of pollution, waste management. It comes at a carbon cost to bring tourists there, supply chains, etc. In some places, supply chains can be made much more local, which would reduce the carbon footprint. But in other places, it is very carbon and resource intensive to operate tourism, and in some ways then quite vulnerable as well. So I think we need to think a little bit more carefully, where do we want, how much and what type of tourism, where is it sustainable, where can we deliver it in the long term. We also need much more radical change. We can't rely on incremental change. As I said, that's a fallacy. We need completely revolutionary building design, water management, renewable energy, right built in, supply chain management, staff training, guest behavior. And that's a key thing. Involve the guests, bring the guests back in, don't be shy of involving them. Tourism can be an opportunity to reconnect them to nature, to educate them about particular behaviors, whether it's around water, energy, other things to do with nature, tree planting, etc. Tourists need to be part of the solution. So I'm looking forward to hearing what else comes out of the session, but I hope you're having a very robust discussion on some of the constraints we're actually facing for tourism. We have to talk about the growth paradigm. We have to talk about radical changes. We have to be a little bit more honest about what tourism can achieve and what it may not be able to achieve, or where we have to do things very differently. I don't have the answers to that. I actually think the next step would be to have a think tank or some substantial initiative to really think outside the box. What are these transformational changes? What would it mean for tourism? What are the technologies? What are the compromises? What are the knowledge gaps? What do we need to do for tourism to reach net zero emissions by 2050 if we did our fair share for the Paris Agreement? So I think a lot of thought needs to go into that. Otherwise, we simply will not make it. So thank you again for the opportunity, and have a very productive time at the World Travel Market. Bye.
Sound on? Yes, great. Right, thanks everybody. I'm John Proctor. I work with a program called Green Tourism. This is a nice picture. This is where we are based, or this is part of where we're based up in the Scottish Highlands. This is one of our businesses. It's Glenelg Inn. And as Chris has highlighted, we need to be radical, and we need to really deliver a step change in tourism if we're really going to have a future, and a future that we're all going to enjoy. Just out of interest, how many people have flown over the last month? Could we have a show of hands? So we've got about a third of the audience here have flown. Can you put your hands up again if you've offset your carbon emissions? Okay, that's great. That shows about half of the half, so that's good. What I would just like to show with this image is the Glenelg Inn. You could stay in this inn for a year for the same amount of carbon emissions as you would to fly across the Atlantic. That's the sort of level of impact that we're talking about with travel. Travel has a massive impact, and it's great that accommodation do their bit to obviously deliver change, and Glenelg is doing an awful lot. Let's not be under any doubt they do a lot. They have a gold award of green tourism, but it does also show how much we've got to maybe tackle some of the other issues, and hopefully we will see some transformative issues in terms of travel, so that we can still see the world. But that is a sobering thought. Okay, I'm going to mention travel again a little bit later, but otherwise I'm going to move forward onto our program and just a little bit more about our mission. This is our team. We have a green team who are our assessors who go out on the road. We have a 3-level certification program. We believe in 3 levels as a certification because it helps to move that transformation. People move, they start off, do simple things, get a bronze award, keep doing those practical actions, go up to silver, and then hopefully go up to gold. We've been going since 1997, and since we started our program, you may have seen other green initiatives. There's a program called Travel Life. They also do bronze, silver, gold. They have an award program, and there's also TripAdvisor. I don't know if you know the TripAdvisor. They have a Green Leaders program, and they also have bronze, silver, gold. So there are programs out there to try and move people forward in terms of sustainability. Our program, like I said, started in 1997, which is 20 years, and we're about to present our 20th anniversary report. One of the things when Harold Goodwin, who organised this event, asked me to come today, was to set the challenge on how we are reporting our impacts on being greener businesses and so on. And we've always used bronze, silver, gold as our symbols to show how people are moving forward. But I do think we need to do more to tell that story more fully. I think people follow stories, and I think that's something that we're going to take from today. And like I say, we've got our 20th anniversary coming up, and we're going to be presenting our 20 years achievements. As you'll see from the slide, we've managed to work with 12,000 businesses to provide them a framework to how to improve their businesses. These are basically UK businesses, and although 12,000 sounds a lot of businesses, I think there's about 60,000 tourism businesses in the UK, so there's still a lot of potential for us to grow. We work with a lot of the mainstream accommodation providers, so overall we have 32 million bed nights that are serviced in the UK, and 36 million people come to stay in visit a visitor attraction that's part of green tourism. In terms of water and energy, which is part of today, we've estimated that we saved over the last 5 years 700,000 cubic meters of water. That's by transforming hotels from having 12 litres a minute on showers down to 8 litres a minute and below. We use 8 litres as sort of happy medium, a sort of Goldilocks value in terms of water consumption, because it's not too little and it's not too much. It's a kind of nice efficient figure. And of course we might even see products that come even lower than that in the future. We've started seeing things like toilets, flush systems that only use 1 litre flush as opposed to the normal 6 litre flush. So there's really tremendous progress that we can see, even in the UK where we have a lot of water, to be more water efficient. And these are all parts of the program. We've also on track with saving 1 million tons of carbon dioxide by 2018. That will be the amount of carbon our hotels have saved, our tourism properties have saved on a year-by-year basis up until 2018 from a baseline that we started in 2010. This is what we put on the website at the moment. It's fairly sort of flat. It's a bit boring, but it does show some figures. But I mean, you can see that 2008, 10, and 11, that's also a long time ago. We used 2010 as our baseline year for measuring our carbon performance. So when we measure the carbon reduction of 1 million tons, it's compared to a 2010 figure. So for example, in 2010, hotels were consuming 26 kilograms of CO2 per overnight, and now they're consuming closer to about 18, it's 17 point something kilograms of CO2 in 2015. So you can see that we're helping hotels to look at their carbon and look at their occupancy, raise their occupancy and also reduce their carbon. We use a program that we developed called the Green Tourism Carbon Calculator. It's quite simple. You only need 5 figures. You could do this for your own home just as much as you could do it for a hotel. You need to know your electricity consumption, your gas or oil consumption, the floor area of your business, something measuring your performance. So for example, in a hotel, it's bed nights, or if it's a conference center, it's delegates, and your water consumption in cubic meters. And if you know those figures, you can work out what your performance is. Now, most of you will probably know, if you have a vehicle, what your miles per gallon for a car is, because you think about the efficiency and how much it costs to run. How many of you actually know how much your carbon is for where you stay, whether it's the accommodation you book, or whether it's or the hotels that you own, or whether it's where you actually stay at home? Do you really know that? And yet your carbon footprint associated with where you live is more than the amount of carbon you use on a typical driving situation. So I think there's a really big question here into us understanding and using these sorts of figures, and this is the sort of transformation we need to help encourage more people to understand their emissions and then work on reducing them. But it doesn't need to be complicated. It's quite simple. This is what we can produce from those figures. We can produce a certificate. All our businesses that provide the data, it produces a carbon calculator certificate. They're free to be able to put that on their website, and I can tell you it's probably less than 1% of our businesses that actually promote this to the consumer. Now, it may be it's a little, I'm a bit of a techno geek or whatever, so maybe it's a bit techie, so it's got quite a lot of information on it. It compares against some benchmarks. You can see the red, orange, green and blue are benchmarks, and you can see the purple chart, the top one, shows a reduction, and this is the business reducing their carbon footprint from 1 year to the next. So it tracks up to 3 years and shows you a trend. So I thought that was quite a good way of being able to demonstrate the figures. And at the bottom in the yellow, it highlights the number of tons of carbon dioxide that the hotel is responsible for. So we have that, but like I say, I think we need to probably find more innovative and creative and more exciting ways to present this information and tell the story of our businesses. So this is something you might find if you're quite techie minded. These are the benchmarks that we use. These are all the benchmarks that we set from 2010. It took us till 2010 to start really establishing benchmarks. That's because we needed to get enough data so that we could try and see the difference between good, fair, poor and excellent businesses. And you'll see the excellent businesses are businesses that are under 5, under 10 kilograms of CO2 per overnight. So you can see from a business starting at 20 or 30, that's quite a transformation. But it is possible. It's possible with renewables on site to reduce your carbon emission to 0. That's quite possible. Even if you can't do that, you can also look at offsets, although we don't allow offsets in our carbon calculation method because we don't believe those are as good as the actual consumption that you have. We also look at the performance in terms of kilowatt hours per square meter, and that's the performance of the building. It gives you a great figure for how the building is performing, and these compare favorably across the UK. In terms of international benchmarks, I think there are different figures available for that, and you may hear those later on today. Okay, I mentioned about travel. Travel is something that we recognise it's the elephant in the room. It's the big impact that we have, even more than accommodation. And we've just started working, and we're just piloting with Cambridge, with Meet Cambridge and a couple of other partners, an event manager tool called Eve. It's for events, venues, emissions, and it allows you to use your carbon metrics to look at your travel, the accommodation of where you've booked your event or your stay, and any venues that you might be using for your conferencing, etc. Nice and simple. We then balance those carbon emissions, or you can potentially balance those carbon emissions with a number of projects. We're working in Zimbabwe at the moment because we have the certification operating there. We work with Environment Africa. We're looking at solar panels in Zimbabwe, which support providing drinking water to rural communities. So that's solar water pumps. Tree planting in the UK with the Woodland Trust, and we're working also with the World Land Trust, which is a carbon program related to rainforests. I don't need to say more about it than that, I don't think, so that's good. These are just a quick few examples just to finish with. Edinburgh International Conference Centre. Great centre. They've been a member for about 10 years, but you can see since 2013 they've got some quite impressive figures in terms of the carbon they've reduced and the energy they've reduced. They've really focused on it. So although they're a 1990s build, that doesn't mean to say that it was built as the greenest building then. They can still do more. They are doing more. They're obviously retrofitting things like LED lights, which weren't available in the 90s. And you can see their carbon performance, they've managed to change from 350 kilowatt hours per square metre down to 210. So again, quite a transformation, moving from poor to good in our category. And still some scope to do more, but excellent in that respect. And they have our highest grading, the Gold Award. Crystal, if you don't know the Crystal, I recommend you getting on the Emirates Sky train, the cable car that goes across into central London, or across to the O2. The Crystal is one of the buildings you'll see from that journey. It's a Siemens building built about 10 years ago now, I think, or 8 years ago, and that has a carbon performance of 96 kilowatt hours per square metre. So again, you can really see how they've actually been able to reduce their carbon footprint and reduce their energy consumption to get into that high performance category. And they've done lots of different things, solar PVs and ground source heat pumps and so on. And then a third one, just to finish with, Metropolitan Hotel. They have a silver award with us. They're not the most eco building. You won't look at them and be dumbstruck by what they've done. They're a fairly standard hotel near Park Lane. But they've managed to do some really good things in terms of reducing their carbon footprint whilst also managing to increase their bed occupancy. Based upon 40,000 bed nights, which is their annual occupancy, they've saved over 1,000 tons of carbon dioxide over a year. So that shows that even mainstream businesses can really make a difference if they can, as Chris has mentioned, engage with customers, but also do a lot of the back of house things that you don't necessarily see when you stay there, which include things like LED lighting in corridors and boilers and so on and so on. So that's really all I wanted to probably highlight. This I'll just finish. Obviously, like you say, we've been doing 20 years of this program. If you'd like to see our 20th anniversary report, please get in touch. It'll be available from March next year. So we're still completing all the figures and pulling together all the data. I do know that, for example, apart from the 1 million tons of carbon we've saved, we've got 60 megawatts of renewable energy in green tourism. That's businesses who've got biomass boilers, businesses that have got wind turbines, hydroelectric power programs, things like that. So some really transformative businesses. We're really trying to transform the industry where we're based here in the UK, but we'd love to work with others. And if you'd like to connect with us, please, help join the movement. Let's tell the story. As you saw at the beginning of the presentation, I highlighted the Highlands of Scotland. The lady there is from the Wesley Hotel. She's based in Euston, just near Euston Station. And Euston Station is where you can get the sleeper, so you can avoid getting the train and come up and see beautiful Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. We don't have too much time, so what we're going to do is have the other two speakers and then have a panel conversation afterwards. So, Lucy, you have 5 minutes. Thank you. Lucy from Ecosphere.
Good morning, everyone. So my name's Lucy Arndt, and I work for Ecosphere Plus, and today I'm going to talk about climate solutions for tourism. So just to start off with, who is Ecosphere Plus and why do we exist? So our mission is to ease climate stress through protecting forests. We deliver innovative business-driven solutions for helping companies rebalance carbon emissions and engage and empower consumers, all while achieving the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. So today I'm just briefly going to cover the current state of the industry because the first video session was really excellent at doing that. And then various ways that we specifically are helping to provide solutions for this issue. So to begin with, the impact of tourism is pretty large, but there's also huge potential for positive impact, and that's why we're here. So to begin with, the travel and tourism sector contributes more greenhouse gas emissions than most nation states, contributing 5% of global carbon emissions. And in the next 25 years, that is expected to double. So the growth in this industry is really massive, particularly on the impact on the environment. And yet, tourism is one of the most highly climate-sensitive sectors. Many destinations are dependent on climate as their principal attraction, like, sun and sea destinations or winter sport holidays, for example, or on the environment itself for wildlife and biodiversity. And we've seen increasing examples of holiday destinations being affected. Ski slopes without snow or Caribbean resorts destroyed by hurricanes. And yet, despite these impacts and risks of non-action, the tourism sector and companies in this area lag behind leading businesses on reporting and emissions. And again, this was discussed quite a bit in the video, so I won't go more into that. At the same time, regulation is coming. So this is a map of all the areas in the world where carbon pricing regulation is either present or planned. So as you can see, it's pretty extensive, and this is expanding every year. In preparation for this, almost 1,400 companies globally are factoring in an internal price of carbon into their business plans. And this really means just putting a value on the cost of emitting carbon. Also, you may have heard that in just about a year ago, in 2016, the aviation industry passed the first global offsetting scheme to cover an entire industry with the goal of being carbon neutral for growth from 2020. And this is a really huge move from an industry sector that we've not really seen before. So those are some of the risks, but what are the opportunities? There are many reasons for taking action. More than nearly any industry in the world, tourism benefits from a happy planet, and its success is directly linked to good and reliable weather, natural beauty, and people engaging directly with the outside world. Also, consumer preferences are changing. For example, ecotourism and adventure travel are among the fastest growing areas, and they're expanding by 20 to 34% every year. Also, travelers are more aware of issues of travel itself, and their willingness to spend on environmentally friendly travel has increased by 1/3 in the last decade. And these shifts in tourist interests is a key opportunity for the industry. In addition to this, some of the biggest change in the industry, or key driver of growth actually, is from millennials. And millennials are well documented for being more sustainably minded. And I'll just throw out a few facts. Sorry for all the stats. So 73% of millennials and Generation Z are willing to pay more for sustainability compared to 51% of baby boomers. Also, 9 in 10 millennials would switch brands to one associated with a cause. And also, 66% of millennials say they are willing to pay more for products and services with positive social and environmental impact. So, millennials are the most growing element of growth for the industry, and they are a sector of consumers that want to pay more and want to see more environmental and social causes with the brands that they buy from. Just one really quick example of some companies that are starting to respond with a range of action to address both these risks and opportunities. The World Tourism and Travel Council has made a commitment to reduce emissions by 50% by 2035, and that's a group of 150 companies. And Starwood Hotels, just one example of a company that is setting emissions targets and taking action. And they've set a goal for 30% reduction in energy and 20% reduction in water consumption. So, what does EcoSphere Plus do, and how can we help? So we provide real concrete solutions that are simple for businesses to integrate, that really reach and address and engage consumers. We put a price on carbon to fund a range of social and environmental benefits in some of the most valuable ecosystems in the world that all help to achieve the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. We work to protect forests, which have amazing benefits beyond carbon. Investing them can help businesses address multiple targets, such as water, women's empowerment, local development, and biodiversity, in addition to addressing greenhouse gas emissions, and all while, at the same time, connecting consumers to nature. And remember, ecotourism is the fastest growing sector in the tourism industry. So some of our solutions are just up here on the screen that are a really simple and easy way to integrate some of this into business models. For example, we offer zero carbon car rentals for under 1p a mile, or zero carbon short haul flights for less than £1 per passenger. And these can be for tour operators or agencies or airlines. And all of these solutions have tangible impacts. For example, one of these solutions up on the board is, or on the screen, is for tour operators and agencies offering carbon neutral holidays for about £2 per person a day. And for example, making a 10-day holiday carbon neutral at this rate has the same impact of protecting 350 trees or about 1 football pitch worth of rainforest. So that's all. We'd love to speak to you about how we can help you balance your impact and achieve targets, which will reduce risk, tap into opportunities from changing consumer preferences, all through having multiple positive impacts in some of the most beautiful ecosystems in the world. My colleague was just handing out some flyers, and happy to answer any questions in the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Nicholas, would you like to present on International Tourism Partnership? And then afterwards we'll have questions. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, everybody. My name is Nicholas Perrin. I'm the Program Manager for the International Tourism Partnership. And I'm going to be talking to you about the hotel carbon emissions in the whole industry. Just a quick word to say who we are. We're a non-profit based in London, but we work with hotel chains globally, the biggest names you know of, which gives us a great reach in everything we do, reaching more than 30,000 hotels and more than 1.5 million employees worldwide. So 5 minutes is a really short time to tell you all about everything we do and the great things we do. I will today specifically talk about carbon emissions in the hotel industry. So let's have a look. I'd like to really second what Susan Becken was presenting in the video that you've seen at the start. And what we've been focusing on in the past year is trying to see, well, exactly how much the hotel industry globally is emitting. So following the approach called the sector decarbonization approach, we've commissioned some research to study how much the hotel industry is emitting globally and how much will it emit in the next 20 and 30 years to 2030 and to 2050. And basically looking at, well, if we have to find a way to align the sector with the Paris Agreement on climate change and stay below the 2-degree threshold, well, how much do we actually need to reduce? So what you see is very much about taking into account growth. So on the left side, you'll see that's pretty much the growth of the sector globally to 2030, 2050. And on the right-hand side, this is what is described as how much each sector of the economy needs to reduce. So you'll see two trends that go in opposite directions, and that's what we define as decoupling emissions from growth. So we need to decouple these emissions by a huge factor. And the research that we've commissioned showed that the following figures is what we need to align with. So basically, to keep pace, the global hotel industry needs to reduce GHG emissions per room and per year by 66% by 2030 and 90% by 2050, which is a huge effort. Just to give you an idea of what it represents, more than 50% of these emissions are coming currently from two two countries only, the US and China. This gives you an idea of where we need to focus our thoughts. This is a report that we've just published last week, actually, which is available online, and where you can see sort of the practicalities and the theory behind these findings, and I'm happy to tell you more about it. You may ask, well, how can we actually get there? What are we going to focus on to get there? Well, there's two things. One is technical approaches. How do we increase efficiency? How can we use more and produce more renewable energy? And how can we electrify the equipment so we rely less on fossil fuels? The second approach we talk with our hotel companies are corporate management approaches. So how can we change the way we look at carbon and energy? How do we value them? How can we evolve the way that capital is sourced and spent? How do we evolve the relationship with investors, with owners, with franchisees, to really take the climate action forward? We are structuring this work within the global goals and the sustainable development goals, of course. We have set a common horizon for our companies and for the sector to align with, which is to align with science-based targets, which is very much in line with this methodology. And we're also helping our members with guidance, best practice, and tools such as the Hotel Carbon Measurement Initiative to measure and report emissions in a consistent way. And looking beyond, we'll be looking at how we can address those challenges collectively, looking at financing, looking at engaging owners and investors, and getting franchisees and the rest of the industry on board. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nick. I'm terribly sorry to have cut you so short. You've got a lot to say. And in summary, I think you've seen from Susanna to say radical things have to happen. Seen John show how hard his organisation has worked. We've got some really interesting speakers. Are there any questions for them while they're here? One more person, and there's no questions. You will have to see the speakers afterwards, I'm sorry. Please, go ahead.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, hi, my name's Lynn and I'm from Asia DMC. This morning we've heard a lot about organizations who help hoteliers. Jonathan mentioned in his presentation that travel is a big component, and this is what my business does. Our business is in the business of bringing people from A to B and looking after everything in between. Now, obviously, we are a white elephant in the room, so on behalf of the people who are DMCs and tour operators, please allow me to be the elephant. There are many ways that we contribute to the increase of CO2, and that includes transport, air bookings, along with hotel bookings. So for myself, we are based in Southeast Asia and based in Hanoi, where we do have a very hard time and a difficult time because we have a developing infrastructure. We don't have access to a lot of green-friendly setups, and so it is really our key mission to work with some of the larger operators who are working with these organizations here, and along with the small primary suppliers who are working to increase. Because allow me to remind you that working on a sustainable level isn't just about the environment, but it's also about the responsible levels of economy as well, and managing the mixture between commerce as well as environmental. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for being here this morning and showing an interest in the direction of where we're going. I firmly believe that it's important for organizations like myself, like Asia DMC, as well as hoteliers, to support the growing community and the growing demand for more green and sustainable friendly travel experiences.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
So we don't have time for questions, but I think obviously you must have questions, so please do see the panelists after this session. They put a lot of time and effort, and there's some very interesting findings there. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you.